per requested by one Aaron Solomon, his walk-up music is Wild Wild West.
I love it. And he joins us now. He's got his Otto the Orange hat on.
How you doing, Aaron?
Aaron, great to see you.
Great to see you guys. Thank you very much for the Wild Wild West walk-up music, because from the first day that we talked about NIL before it was signed, we said it was going to be the Wild Wild West.
All right, there is so much to break down here, and so much we want to get your thoughts on. I guess let's start just kind of broad-based here. The House settlement officially goes through on Friday. Is this a step forward for college athletics?
That's it. Okay, well, sorry to be that guy, but that's an impossible question to answer. It's a step forward for athletes who, unlike Pauly, who chose to do intermittent fasts, did basically intermittent fasts for decades and decades because they weren't getting enough calories a day. And heaven forbid someone should buy these athletes a Big Mac because they might be sacrificing their NCAA eligibility. So it is absolutely a step forward for athletes who deserve to be compensated for their labors. Is it a step forward for college athletics? In my opinion, the fact that any power that the NCAA had before last week is pretty much gone is a step forward. But now we're just setting up a new Wild Wild West with the College Sports Commission, a freshly formed regulatory body created in response to the House versus NCAA lawsuit.
All right, so along those lines, and I said this on the show yesterday, I want to get your thoughts on this. I said, it kind of feels like they're trading one set of problems for a new set of problems. Anytime you go to something new like this, there are going to be some unintended consequences, I would assume. What are some of these unintended consequences that you can foresee happening with college sports, but, in particular, men's basketball and football? So
first of all, I'm going to say that the CSC is an intended consequence. Rather than these big college football conferences having to deal with a little bit independent NCAA, they're just going to be controlling the CSC and the guy they put in place, right? Who has a very good pedigree. There's no doubt about that. So basically, that's a real step forward for these conferences. It's an intended consequence. There's tons of unintended consequences, which is a whole spate of further legislation that's going to come after House versus NCAA. How we're going to divide, which sounds like a lot of money in the settlement, but it's actually going to be very little per head from everybody who had their NIL rights violated over the years, and how big the pie is going to be moving forward and how many slices it's getting divided into. I got to throw this in because I was thinking about this literally the second the decision came down. We've gone from an era where a public university head football coach earns around what 130 to 140 public school teachers earn, to an era where the same coach earns 120 to 130 times what a public school teacher earns, but the star quarterback at somewhere like University of Michigan could also earn what 43 or 44 public school teachers earn. I think that's kind of an unintended consequence.
Yeah. And that's crazy when you put it like that. Eye-opening. Go ahead, Paulie.
I brought this up yesterday, and I'm curious to get your take on it, is how long before somebody who plays a sport besides football or basketball sues either his school or the NCAA because they only allotted 1% to 2% for them, but they're being used on billboards and, whatnot by the university, and they think that they deserve a bigger share of the pie?
So the first people that get taken out of your pot, and it's an excellent question, are people who participate in an Olympic sport, because they're basically immune from all of this. Because remember, Olympics still, and you have to laugh, right? Because I know all of us are thinking of LeBron with a gold medal, but Olympics are still amateurism. They're amateurism in certain sports, so those sports don't count. So anybody there could make an argument saying, hey, listen, even though I'm in an Olympic sport, my image is being used in a way that I didn't authorize. Therefore, I'm going to sue for money to be put into trust for me and my family when I'm no longer a quote unquote amateur. So no, it's not going to take long at all for this to happen. And it's not going to take long at all for the Reggie Bushes of ancient generations to say, not only did you make a lot of money off me when I was in college, but I got hurt in college. So instead of my anticipated 7-year, or maybe back then 11-year NFL career, I got 2 years. So I'm suing you for the difference between 2 and 11. That's 9 years. So who's paying for that? Is it going to be USC who pays for it? Is it going to be the antiquated Pac-12? Is it going to be the old NCAA? There's so many questions legally that we haven't seen yet, and they're coming.
I had another question. We were just talking that they want to pass a law. They want to put this into law in America and make it so that this settlement is the law of the land. How would that affect the lawsuits? Would it stop them? Would it make them less likely to pass? What would the effect of if this is law do to the lawsuits that are potential?
Well, I've been saying for a long time that it would be great to have federal legislation that really kind of tied this up, but it's slow in coming and no one's sure if it's ever going to come. Secondly, even if we do have federal legislation, you can sue to show that that legislation is unconstitutional. It shows restraint of trade, that it puts copyright violations into the law where they shouldn't be able to exist. So all this stuff has to work through the courts. As we know, we've got a Supreme Court in the United States now that's kind of busy with a lot of emergency matters, and they're going to be for the next, let's say, 2.5 years.
One of the topics as it relates to the lawsuits that came up, and we were just talking about this, I don't know how early you tuned in, and I don't know if you caught what we were talking about with fair market value, but I saw that, one of the things that this new entity will be allowed to do is any deal over $600 from an outside source outside the school, they will be able to, look at it and determine whether or not it's good to go or whether they turn it down. And if it doesn't meet fair market value, they say they're going to turn it down. How do you determine fair market value? Because it seems to me that if the average quarterback makes $5 million, but somebody's willing to pay a quarterback $8 million, does that not mean that the market rises to that new level? Or how does that work from a legal perspective, Aaron?
Okay, so fair market value is such an amorphous thing. Hey, listen, look at me, guys. I'm a very attractive aging man. And what I'm getting paid for doing face modeling at the moment is zero. What if I was getting $1 million per ad? You could look at my face and you could say that's not fair market value. This is the most important piece of this. NIL has brought everything that was happening under the table, everything, that's an exaggeration, 90% of what was happening under the table, above the table. So the minute that this commissioner starts saying, this Underwood deal is not fair market value, but this deal for the volleyball player for $38.52 to go show up at Subway is fair market value, then we just put all this money back under the table and we start again. And then it becomes whatever bonanza, I guess, instead of the Wild Wild West.
So I thought the same thing. So you agree that we're going to get back to... The danger is we're going to get back to everybody cheating, and there's more, not that people stop cheating, but we're going to start getting back to those under-the-table dealings.
The more immediate danger is that the conference commissioners who put this person into place to regulate all this better be darn sure at this point that this person is going to be fair and equitable. My prediction is that certain conferences and certain schools are going to receive, intentionally or not, favorable treatment, and that's going to bring this whole Jenga tower down.
That was my question on the whole fair market. Will the specific actual market that these players are playing in play into effect? Whereas if, say, you're at St. John's basketball and you're in New York City and a car dealer offers you $1 million as opposed to Syracuse, would that play into it? Could they say, well, it is New York City and that car dealer's got more money?
Well, of course. I mean, look, Syracuse is a wonderful town. I'm repping my Syracuse hat today. What the wealthiest car dealer, no matter how large a supporter she or he is of Orange Athletics, is going to pay any athlete is probably a fraction of what Keyshawn Johnson's NAL collective is going to get a remarkable superstar, the next Cooper Flagg, who decides to go to SC instead of Duke. That's life. That's the way it goes. That's why we have big markets and we have small markets and we have in-between markets. And remember, in sports outside of football and basketball, who are in tiny markets. So that athlete could be getting 1/500th for the same work as somebody else. You can't tell me the person in the bigger market, it's not fair market value. Sure it is. Fair market value is what somebody's going to pay.
So, Aaron, one of the things that I believe anyway was behind this, this new legislation was they want to create a more even playing field, right? Cap everything at, the House settlement, $20.5 million. Schools can give directly to athletes. It's up to them how they distribute it, but everybody's on an equal playing field. And we know that that's not the case. Not everybody's on an equal playing field. But I want to get your thoughts on Syracuse in particular. Syracuse is not an SEC school or a Big Ten school or even one of the, the top ACC schools in terms of football when you look at Clemson and Florida State and so on and so forth. Will this new situation help a school like Syracuse, ultimately hurt a school like Syracuse, or do they just kind of stay where they are in the pecking order?
So for football, it hurts more than it helps. It's close to them staying where they are. There's just much more money. There's bigger football markets, et cetera. Basketball, as we know, is a different game. You've got so many one and dones. You get 3 world-class players on the floor, a couple decent ones, a couple people off the bench. You can cull together a team fairly quickly, and we've seen that even with last year's St. John's run, right? We've seen that. So it's just a different game where football requires so much more depth, as well as quantity in your roster. So I'd say if I had to sum it up, it probably hurts a little bit in football and helps a little bit in basketball. Compete against bigger conferences, bigger schools.
You brought up St. John's and Paulie brought up St. John's. What about the Big East Conference in particular? Do you see the fact that they don't have to worry about football teams, the Marquettes and Georgetowns and, and all the other teams in that Big East Providence, do you see a resurgence from the Big East? St. John's is already kind of back, but will you see those other programs in the Big East kind of rise up in basketball because they only have to fund, for the most part, that sport and not football?
Well, yeah, but also because if you think about regions in the country, regionally, the Northeast is very wealthy. I mean, that's just, meaning that there's lots of businesses that would love to have these players come to town. Plus, we all know not just the Spike Lees of the world, but lots of other business people and supporters just love to go to Madison Square Garden and places like that and watch college basketball, right? So I think it becomes a regional thing in a way. But again, the difference with basketball is that if you've got enough money behind it and enough interested businesses, you could take, a business that's kind of in the middle of nowhere in a region that's not as popular as others, get some serious money behind a smaller college and build a very competitive program very quickly. Maybe if President Trump is right and we start building more cars and more parts in the United States, we're going to see resurgence in places like Michigan and who knows, right?
One of the reasons I love having you on, Aaron, is that you're very good at predicting what's coming next. Whether it's 5 years from now or a year from now, it always seems to happen. Whatever you say is coming next, it does end up coming true. So with that being said, what should we be looking for here? Like what is next or on the horizon with this whole situation?
So first of all, much bigger pies, and I even I talk a lot about the WNBA, as you know, and I predicted that WNBA pie would be growing like it is now. I mean, the interest in women's professional basketball and college basketball is unbelievable and growing. The same thing is happening with major college athletics. As the pie gets bigger, everybody wants a bigger piece of the pie for themselves. It never matters how big the pie is, it's never enough. I think the part of the future is we're going to see more wild, wild west, less enforcement, a lot more court cases, and more money in more people's pockets. But like I said a few minutes ago, don't think that's going to make it more equitable. We're not going to have coaches earn less. We're not going to have programs bring in less. This is not being done for the edification of the athletes. It's like we had to say, well, to get all this pie so much bigger, we got to start paying athletes. But don't worry about it because, this $2.8 billion settlement, right? With as many athletes as we're going to need to feed from that who had NAIL issues from the past, it's not that much per person. So I still think that there's going to be a lot more money going around, and it's going to go to these universities, these programs, and these conferences and TV contracts.
To follow up on that, Aaron, do you think we'll get to a point where the athletes are making more than the coaches, that the schools will look at it and say, you know what, let's save a few bucks on our head coach because we need to pay these players every year. We got to get, it's more important to get good players than it is to get a good coach. Do you think we're going to get to a point where the athletes, or at least the top athletes, are making more than the coaches?
Well, even this year, top athletes at some schools will make more than some coaches. We're talking about the examples that I like to give are, the Urban Meyer kind of examples, right? So in that situation, no. You're always going to spend money on those top coaches because they're program builders, which means they have the capacity to go into people's homes and bring their assistants into people's homes and bring in the kind of athletes who can earn Underwood NAL money for next year. So that's really, really important. You're not going to start paying the coaches less.
Gotcha. And then I guess just lastly, Aaron, you've been gracious with your time. We've already had you on for almost 20 minutes. So we will let you go here. But is there anything else we didn't touch on that you think is important to either, get across to us or get across to our listeners?
I think that the most important thing about this is nothing is going to be set in stone. The next time you read something about where this is going, it's just a fork in the road. It's just another turn. Everybody should remember that it's an infinite amount of money that can go into these big-time college athletics. So there's just going to be more money to go around. TV contracts that we saw 10 years ago that we thought we'd never eclipse, we've eclipsed 5X, and they're going to be eclipsed 10X. So it's just going to be more and more money because we have an insatiable appetite, not just in the U.S., but around the world, for big-time college athletics.
All right. As you said, it's a topic that's not going away anytime soon. We really appreciate you coming on. Thanks so much for the insight. I feel like we could, talk to you for the whole show about this, but we will let you go, Aaron. Be well, and hopefully we'll talk again soon.
Anytime.